tonight's On Point with Try Coaching is about risk management, but this is particularly about was sufficient feedback given to help the client understand any potential safety critical incidents. And the word potential there is really, really important, because if it's actual, it's probably too late. So your job, the agenda, by the end of this session, you'll be able to understand the concept of risk management and the 4 steps, yes, 4 steps that constitute managing the risk to give sufficient feedback for any safety critical incidents. I think it'd be really useful if you make notes, as this will help the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. So, what is risk management? Risk management is the continual process that identifies the problem, analyzes what has or could happen, evaluates where are and what are the risks, then implements an action plan to rectify the future risk. Risk management is not a teaching strategy. See it, say it, sort it is not training. There is an art to delivering a lesson that constitutes goal setting and risk management. And I need to make it clear this presentation is about risk management only. So key points to consider in managing the risk. Communication should be clear and early. Clear, not look over there and not look at this. You know, look at the car on the left, the red car on the left. Be aware of the cyclist on the right. Look at the pedestrian wearing the yellow coat. Making sure that you clarify whatever risk that you're considering, and it's what you may be considering at this in time which is important, and it has to be early. Now you're considering this, yeah, and you're going to communicate it clear and early if you deem it necessary. So to do that, you need to watch the client, because actually all the risk comes from watching the client. You're all aware probably of head, hands, feet, but also watching the client, watching their body language. You can quite often tell as they start to move forward in their seat that they're getting stressed, or you can see the tension in their arms. Make sure that you watch the client, because they're the ones who've eventually got to keep the car safe. Manage expectations. And so managing expectations really is about job sharing, making sure that you've set up how the risk is going to be managed on each individual lesson and throughout that lesson, because managing the risk will change as lessons progress and as learners improve. So just because you may have started on day one with a certain element of managing expectations, you may need to change that after 20 minutes, or you might need to change it after 10 lessons. You need to make sure that you and your client are on the same page and that you're managing their expectations, because ultimately they're the ones who will eventually manage all the risk. I also want you to consider opportunities as well as threats. Threats are usually quite easy to spot, because that's someone, you know, behaving in a manner which increases that critical safety element. But also consider opportunities when someone is doing something correctly, so that you can use that to raise awareness. You must analyze the risk which is presented. You must be aware of that risk first of all, and you need to do that in your head silently, potentially at first, because then you've got to decide whether you're going to communicate it clear and early, because you're going to be watching the client to make sure that they're responding. And of course, I'm going to go into this in a little bit more detail as the presentation goes on. Plan and implement your risk response. You should have a plan for your risk response when something happens on the road. Now, that just may start with highlighting the risk or highlighting the potential risk. It then may go from there to a question. It then may go to direct telling, and it may go to you taking action. You need to be clear about how you're going to step in, and your client needs to be aware of how you're going to step in. And you must be clear with that plan. Winging it doesn't work. You must be used to this. You know, people here have been in ADI a long time, will have developed what I call their spider sense. They know, have an instinct, their intuition tells them that what's going to happen. But they've got that through years of practice. You need to have a plan. I can't, this always amazes me how when I've sat in the back of lessons that we fail to state, and I'm going to say this quite bluntly, the bleeding bloody obvious. You know, the thing about driving is state the obvious. Don't assume anyone has missed something or anyone has seen something. We know that old adage about assume makes an ass of you and me. So state the obvious. Use your skills and continually develop your skills. And what I mean by that is those skills around questioning, around feedback, around listening, around rapport. You've got to continually develop those skills, because the more you do it, the better you get at managing the risk. And let's face it, it can be quite dangerous out there. And we see, don't we, events that if they had have unraveled could have been ultimately very, very dangerous. And some of you may well have been involved in crashes and collisions. And then, even though it may not have been your fault, with the benefit of some hindsight, you may have acted differently now than what you did back then, even though there was no fault attached from an insurance point of view. So continually develop your skills, keeps you safe. And own the process. And when I say own the process, that means that your process for risk management must be at an unconscious competence level. That's where it is. Now, to get to that unconscious competence level, you have to be consciously competent first. Easy for me to say. So becoming consciously competent and then starting to own that process of being unconsciously competent. I nearly said incompetent then, but you know, it's easy to get mixed up. So the 4 steps of risk management, and I've gone 4 steps of risk management. Identify the risk. So you're looking for the risk which is out there. You're identifying the risk first of all, because you need to see it and know what's potentially going to happen. You need to analyze that risk, and that's working with the client, but you need to be able to analyze the risk first. When are you going to step in? And evaluate the risk. That's working with the client to help them come up with what actually happened. Probably going to step in and help to rectify the risk in the future, but also helping them to be able to do it for themselves. And I'm going to go through these 4 steps now in far greater detail. So just a reminder, identify the risk is mainly you. Analysing the risk is mainly you. Evaluating the risk is mainly them. Rectifying the risk will be mainly you, and eventually, hopefully, them. So, actively identifying the risk. The key, and this is obvious, identify where are the risks as early as possible. Scan the far, the middle, the near distances, and keep replaying that. Dynamic risk, that's really what we're interested in. That risk that's going to roll on into something quite disastrous. Dynamic risk is usually where road users meet and cross each other and have the potential to develop into safety critical situations. I like to think of it in my head as I'm a director of a disaster movie, and just before I'm going to hit the iceberg, I've actually been given a new role, and the outcome of that movie must be that they missed the iceberg and there was no disaster. So that's the way that I play driving in my head, is that, oh no, there's a disaster coming. How are we going to mitigate the risk so that there is no disaster? It's just a little game that I tend to play for myself. So actively identifying the risk, quite often it's the client that may be presenting the risk. Watching the client, making sure that the light bulb's on, that there's somebody at home, making sure that they've not blanked over. So actively watching them will help you manage the risk and identify where the potential risk could come from. Because you know this, it's not always the other road users, but you've got to ask yourself, what can you see? What are they seeing? So you may need to ask that question. You know, what can you see? Tell me what you are seeing. What can't you see? Quite often, you know, where they've written slow on the road, I translate as speed, lower, observe, warning. Slow's often painted for what you can't see. You then maybe need to ask them again, what are they thinking? Because they may not be thinking, well, what could potentially happen around this bend, for argument's sake? Because it's not about what you can see, quite often it's about what you can't see. So what might you, this is still about you, reasonably expect to happen? And then watching them, how will they manage? That's the question you're asking yourself, because you've got to ask yourself, do I need to step in early? Do I need to prompt them early? Are they okay? And there's no black and white answer here, because driving's dynamic, it changes constantly. So we have to help them to prioritize which hazard represents the greatest threat. Because if you imagine you're driving down the high street and there's shops either side, parked cars, buses, taxis stopping, you've got to help them prioritize, because that's all coming in, you know, so many hazards coming at them. You need to be able to manage and analyze and identify that risk immediately so that you can help your client prioritize which one to deal with first. And also, you've got to consider the environment, because, you know, it's absolutely pouring down with rain. What was normally quite straightforward can become very, very difficult. You need to consider, you know, when I've just mentioned the rain, but the weather, if it's too hot, that in-car environment could be draining them. Have they, and this is simple stuff, have they had something to drink? And when I'm saying drink, we're talking about water. Just make sure this is not vodka. Hang on. No, it is water. Make sure. And also sometimes that they've eaten, because when people get dehydrated, when their sugar levels drop, they can really, really struggle to think. You need to ask them how they're feeling, because when people get nervous, they make mistakes. And we know, and we've seen this a lot in social media, where people are failing their driving tests, it's because they couldn't manage their feelings at the time. Also, your feelings, you know, because, you know, we're driving instructors. We're not Iron Man and Iron Woman. You know, we're driving instructors. We have feelings. Sometimes we're getting overwhelmed. Have we made it too difficult for ourselves? Especially if I've got PDIs in this group, you may find that at times you're getting your worms middled up because everything is coming really at you too quickly. And you may need to consider then the environment that you're in, and I'm going to touch at looking at routes in a little while, but that could just be you're overwhelmed. And if you're overwhelmed, then your client can easily get overwhelmed, because that feeling can be transferred. So also, you need to find out their thought processes, because what they're thinking, yeah, is really, really important in helping you actively identify the risk. You know, what you're thinking, well, I was thinking about what I was going to have for tea. Yeah, not thinking about who's getting off the bus or who's running across the road to catch the bus in the pouring rain. So you need to get them actively involved in helping you identify the risk, because it's not just outside the car, it's also inside the car. And then, you know, the weather, the road surface, all has a part to play in identifying the risk. So I suppose if I go right, consider the environment, what's just sprung into my mind was micro environments. Micro environments may be where you've been on a road where there's an embankment both sides, and you come out onto a bridge, and of course it's a windy day, and then the car gets blown across. So we have micro climates. In frosty and icy weather, you get microclimates in the dip. When the sun comes out, the water tends to melt at the top of the road and roll down into the dip. And of course, it's cooler in the dip, and that's where you may get black ice. So you need to be aware of this as the driving instructor, just to maybe pass the information on. So analysing the problem. So I've been touching on this quite a lot, but analyse the problem. Is the problem the driver? Do you need to help them more? Is the problem other road users? Is it their body language? Is it their speed? And when it's their speed, are they too fast? Are they too slow? Their position on the road. They're in the mirror behind you and their head's going. And we've all experienced that. The car next to you. Oh, they're on the phone. So what's going on around you? This is a lot that we have to take in very short periods of time. And it requires us to have 100% concentration 100% of the time. So not only is the driver fed and watered, are you fed and watered? So you, the instructor, are you having a bad day? Are you the problem? Have you actually got to spend a bit more time looking after yourself? Because all of us have probably gone to work when maybe, for argument's sake, we've got a bad back and we're in pain. And, you know, pain is very dilapidating, and it just really, after a while, just makes us tired, or maybe we are tired, and we need to look at ourselves, because are we the problem? Are we not 100% on it? So it's really important that we're not, you know, in that hierarchical position of blaming the driver and the other road users. Do we need to actually reflect and look at ourselves from time to time? Are we causing the problem? The route. See, the route, I'm going to put actually the next bit up, because the route and the time of day is very important. We know that in the winter we have problems with the low sun. We know that the route at 10 o'clock in the morning can be completely different to the route at 8 o'clock in the morning or 8 o'clock in the evening. So even though we might have a great route at different times of day, that route can become congested, especially in and around school. So we might have, you know, really difficult meeting traffic situations. So we need to consider this, you know, because we need to be able to analyse the problem. We have to analyse what maybe other people are thinking. We will never know, but we can start to surmise that, you know, if we're on a route and there's and we're in a area where there's lots of houses and we see van drivers, we know that people get lots and lots of deliveries these days. So we can expect van drivers to stop and start. So are we on a route where our learner is actually in nursery land, but he's not aware about drivers who stop and start all the time, who may have different priorities to us? Also, with the route, that time of day, you know, people are rushing. Is it still rush hour? Is it school time? So highlighting that and thinking about how people are behaving and what's driving people's behavior. The environment. Again, I've touched on this again, because when we're analysing the problem we've got, is it the environment we're in? If I go back to the low sun, we've just turned the corner and the sun is completely in our eyes. I mean, that can be really, really scary for all of us, because we become blind. So, and then if we can't see, what are we going to do? So we need to think this through and be one step ahead of the game, so that we know we're coming to this bend. We can see the sun shining across this bend. We know we're going to turn into the bend and the sun's going to be in our eyes. Let's be prepared for what's going to happen, not as we get round the corner and we're all blind. So this is, again, us being 100% switched on 100% of the time, and probably warning our driver that this is going to happen. So, evaluating. Questions that enable you and them to evaluate the problem. They must be able to judge and make judgments. Now, this is going to happen generally at the side of the road. You're going to pull over to evaluate. You can't effectively evaluate on the move. They need to make judgments. You need to make judgments. You may need to reevaluate what was going on, but you're going to help them evaluate and assess, because you want to get into their opinion of what was going on. And opinion is not fact. And sometimes they don't understand the facts. They have an opinion, and sometimes that opinion isn't theirs. It's their peers or their parents. We also have opinions, and unfortunately, sometimes our opinions aren't factual as well. So we need to be fully aware that we need to gain opinion when we're evaluating that potential safety critical incident. So here I'm looking at researching and finding facts, and I'll give you some links later, but it's important that we understand where crashes and collisions happen. It's important that we understand where killed and seriously injured are more likely to happen. Where it's important that we understand where people get just injured, and I say just injured. These things are stuff that we should know. We should know what the KSI figures are. There's another useful tool called Crash Map. There's information for Brake from Brake, the road safety charity, that you can look at as well. And I'm going to give you these links later in the presentation so that you can look them up for yourselves if you don't know, but also maybe you want to share these links with your clients as well. Decide what was important. So what you're helping them do when they evaluate, you're helping them to think about what happened, and you're starting to get them to think about what they're going to do differently. So what was important that they should have done, and what is important that they are going to do next? That's what you're doing when you're evaluating. So you've got to find out how was the client feeling. They've got to express how they were feeling and give their opinions on themselves. You need to dig deep, and to be able to do this, you really got to have great rapport with your clients, otherwise they're going to clam up. It's really, really important that this becomes a two-way process, and that they have a safe and non-judgmental environment to be able to evaluate, to be able to decide not where blame lies, because, you know, when people crash, it's generally not an accident. An accident is a rare, random, multifactorial event for which it is impossible to find a single cause. Crash really is when something has happened, a human has made a mistake, and crashes happen 95% of the time. Yeah, the other 5% made up of environment and an act of God generally. So how are they feeling? What was the client thinking? What was going on in their head? How were they thinking about that situation? And how are they starting to think about how they're going to do something differently as they move forward? So to be able to do this, to be able to help someone evaluate, a useful technique is a mind map. Just ring the incident in the middle of a blank page, just put maybe red car, and then to write down everything they could think of, how to avoid the red car, everything. And then all of those things that I've been mentioning about the environment and the weather and the heat in the car and everything they can potentially come up with. And of course, you can help add to this, but it's useful that they do the mind map. If you haven't, if they're not the sort of client who likes to write things down, then you can use scaling effectively. So on a scale of 0 to 10, with 0, you know, you were 100% gonna crash, and 10, you're gonna be perfect, you were never gonna crash. Where were you? Yeah. And so they say there was a 5, just for argument's sake. Okay, so give me the evidence. What was so good about it you gave yourself a 5, but also what's in the gap between 5 and 10? What was missing? What can you do to develop that potential to be safe? What do you need to change? How can I help support you? And how will you know when you've got it right? They're questions that you can use to help them scale. You can also send them away, maybe just to do a reflective log as homework. Look, come back next lesson. We've just gone through this scaling, but I want you to come back next lesson and write a reflective log on what just happened. Yeah, your thoughts. What did you do well? What didn't go so well? How would you change it? Because what we need to remember is this was safety critical, potentially safety critical, and they need to be aware of what that really, really means. Because if it goes wrong, you don't get a second chance. So moving on to rectifying the problem. You need to implement change, they need to implement change, but you need to help them implement change. They can come up with ideas of how to manage the risk in future situations from those mind maps and from that evaluation. You, as the expert, cannot allow them to play. They can have different options, but you've still got to make sure that you manage the risk. This is really important, that you do not allow them to repeat exactly the same mistake again. To make sure it's not repeated, you can prompt them. Simple prompts. Maybe say it was coming into it was looking at a junction. Okay, and a simple prompt may be, where are you going to look first at this junction? And then just wait for their answer, because you're going to ask that prompt in good time so they can recall, because maybe they came into the last junction and was looking and following the curve, and they should have been looking at what's coming into the road. Practice the new knowledge and manage the risk as the client repeats the process of analysing evaluation to come up with different solutions that work. But you must step in if it's not working. And also, you must step in and make sure that you prompt them if it's not working. It's really, really important that you do this. Now, some of you may know about Cole's experiential learning model, and I'll just go through it. Cole's experiential learning model is when they've had an experience. And what we're getting them to do is to reflect and review on that experience. And then it cycles round into concluding or learning from that experience and coming up with new ideas on planning or trying out what was learned, and then gaining another experience. The difference is, though, this is safety critical. And we must make sure that if they've come up with an idea that they're going to try again, it has a potential of working. Because if it doesn't have the potential working, you do not want to try that. It is paramount that we keep the vehicle safe under all circumstances. So, just I thought to help out, we're going to look at the model of goal setting and risk management, which Susan McCormack, who's on here with you today, created. And this is a step away from what I've just been talking about, because this is about being proactive, and this is about using goal setting to help create the learning outcome. And I thought tonight, just in case you get confused, and there's been plenty of time to ask questions afterwards, that I was going to run this model past you. It is silent, so you'll need to pay attention, and I will put a link in the chat afterwards so you can have this model. I think she does it marvellous. Okay, to summarise tonight's session, what is risk management? If we go back to the beginning, risk management is the continual process that identifies the problem, analyses what has and could happen, evaluates where are and what are the risks, and then implements an action plan to rectify the future risk. There was 4 steps to managing the risk. I'll be testing you. Identify the risk, analyze the risk, evaluate the risk, and rectify the risk. It's all there. And then finally, we just had a look at the model of goal setting and risk management.